Most gardeners walk past the ugliest plants at the nursery and reach for whatever looks perfect in the pot. That's the exact wrong instinct, and it's why so many yards end up full of plants that peak for 2 weeks and then sit there doing nothing for the rest of the season. 9 plants exist that look genuinely unremarkable, sometimes downright rough, sitting in that little plastic container, and every single one of them will outperform the popular, photogenic plants right next to them on the shelf once they're actually in the ground. I'm walking you through all 9, exactly why they get overlooked, and exactly why that's a mistake. Before we start, tell me in the comments the last plant you almost didn't buy because it looked unimpressive at the store. Number 1 is Amsonia. In a 1-gallon pot at the nursery, this plant looks like a sad little clump of thin green stems with a few small blue flowers scattered on top. Nobody's grabbing this over the flashy hydrangea sitting 3 feet away. That's the mistake. Once Amsonia is established in the ground, it becomes one of the most reliable, longest-performing plants in an entire perennial bed. The powder blue flowers hold their color in spring, the willowy foliage stays clean and full through the brutal heat of summer when half your other plants are looking rough, and then in October the entire plant turns a brilliant golden yellow that genuinely rivals the full color of trees costing 10 times as much. It's hardy in zones 3 through 9, and it handles drought without complaint once it's rooted in. Cut it back by 1/3 in late June and you get denser growth and a more dramatic fall color show. Nobody photographs this plant at the nursery. Everybody photographs it in October. Number 2 is Baptisia. This one gets skipped constantly because in a small container, it just looks like a bushy green weed. There's no dramatic bloom visible in that pot, no color to catch your eye walking down the aisle. What you're not seeing is that Baptisia develops a deep taproot that makes it nearly indestructible once established, and in its 2nd or 3rd year in the ground, it explodes into deep violet-blue flower spikes rising dramatically above silvery blue-green foliage that stops people walking by. After the flowers finish, decorative seed pods develop and rattle in the wind, adding structure to the border all the way through October. Hardy in zones 3 through 9 with extraordinary drought tolerance most gardeners never expect from something this unassuming in the pot. Here's the catch that actually explains why nurseries don't push this plant harder, that taproot means transplanting it after the 2nd year is nearly impossible without losing the plant. Choose your spot once, plant it there, and let it grow into a larger, more structurally impressive clump every year for decades. Number 3 is Heuchera, known as coral bells, and this one gets passed over for a strange reason. The foliage colors that make it spectacular in a garden bed often look muddy and unremarkable crammed into a small plastic pot under fluorescent nursery lighting. In the ground, under real sunlight, those same leaves show deep burgundy, burnt caramel, lime green, and silver tones that hold from March all the way through December in most U.S. climates. That's 9 months of consistent visual interest from foliage alone, before you even account for the delicate coral, pink, or white flower wands that rise above it in late spring and draw hummingbirds. It's hardy in zones 4 through 9 and genuinely thrives in shade, which makes it one of the most valuable plants you can put under trees or along the north side of a house where almost nothing else survives with any color. One thing worth knowing, Heuchera heaves out of the soil over winter as the ground freezes and thaws. Check your plants in early spring, press the crowns back down, and add a light layer of mulch. That one habit keeps it thriving for years. Number 4 is Veronicastrum, or Culver's root, and this might be the single most overlooked plant on this entire list because in a nursery pot it genuinely looks like nothing, a plain green stem with small leaves and no visible flower at all most of the season it's sold. What that pot doesn't show you is a plant that grows 4 to 6 feet tall with white or soft lavender candelabra-style flower spikes rising straight up with a structural presence nothing else in a summer garden replicates. Hardy in zones 3 through 8, blooming from July through September, and documented as a nectar source for over 100 species of native bees and butterflies. Ecologists actually classify it as a keystone species for mid-Atlantic and Midwestern landscapes, meaning entire insect and bird communities organize their seasonal activity around its presence. Established clumps spread slowly over 3 to 4 years into self-supporting columns that need no staking despite their height. Plant it at the back of a border where that height can be appreciated, and within 2 full growing seasons it becomes the plant every visitor to your yard asks about. Number 5 is Pearly Everlasting. Most people walk right past this one because the bloom looks almost fake. A small papery white flower with a tiny yellow center that doesn't have the saturated color or size that draws the eye at a nursery. That papery texture is actually the entire point. It runs from July all the way to September, and instead of blooming all at once and quitting like most flashy annuals do, it keeps producing new clusters of buds along multiple stems continuously through those weeks. It sits around 18 to 24 inches tall, handles full sun, and honestly does not care much how rich your soil is. It handles dry stretches better than almost anything else, which matters if your region gets a real summer drought, because that drought tolerance is part of why it keeps blooming so long in the first place. Hardy in zones 3 through 8. A lot of florists actually dry this flower for arrangements, so if you like cut flowers in the house, this unassuming little plant gives you double the value, fresh in the garden and dried on your table months later. Now here's something worth knowing before we go further. Number 8 on this list is a plant most gardeners actively pull out of the ground because they think it's a weed, when it's actually one of the most effective pest-fighting perennials you can grow. I'll get to it, but first, tell me honestly, have you ever pulled a plant out of your yard thinking it was junk, only to find out later it was actually something worth keeping? Number 6 is Red Hot Poker. This one gets skipped constantly because the plant shape looks unusual and slightly awkward sitting in a nursery display, almost like a torch stuck in a pot, and that odd silhouette doesn't fit the soft, rounded look most people expect from a flower. That's a genuine mistake. Bees go straight for it, and so do pollinators you wouldn't expect to see on a spiky flower like this. It blooms in stages from the bottom up, which means if you deadhead the spent lower flowers, the plant often pushes out a fresh round instead of just sitting there finished. It sits at 24 to 28 inches, needs full sun, and drainage matters more than the exact soil pH here. If water sits around the roots over winter, the plant struggles. It's hardy in zones 5 through 9, with colors ranging from a classic coral orange fading into yellow, but also lime green and cream varieties if the traditional torch color isn't your style. The unusual shape that gets it skipped at the nursery is the exact same shape that makes it impossible to ignore once it's blooming in your yard. Number 7 is Blazing Star. Most gardeners overlook this one because in a small pot, the foliage looks spiky and almost weedy, more like something you'd pull than plant. Here's something that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. This flower blooms from the top down. Every other flower on this list, and honestly most flowers in general, open from the bottom up. This one does the opposite, deep purple spikes with foliage that looks like it belongs on a different kind of plant entirely. It runs from July through September and holds that window because each clump sends up several spikes that don't all open on the same day, giving you a rolling succession of color instead of a single flush. Hardy in zones 3 through 9 and native to most of the country, which matters if you care about supporting local pollinators instead of just imported ornamentals. And here's the part that makes it worth planting even if you're not big on maintenance, you don't deadhead this one at all. Let it finish naturally and the seed pods that form afterward stay attractive well into the colder months. Number 8 is Yarrow, and this is the plant I mentioned earlier that most gardeners actually pull out of their yard thinking it's a weed, because the feathery foliage does genuinely resemble something wild and unintentional before it flowers. What that instinct misses is that yarrow does not just repel pests, it recruits an army to fight them for you. Its fine, feathery foliage releases camphor and borneol, volatile compounds that create an airborne barrier aphids find intolerable, while its flat-topped flower clusters act as landing platforms for parasitic wasps, hoverflies, and lacewings, the insects that eat aphids and caterpillars for a living. A single lacewing larva can consume up to 200 aphids in a week. Hardy in zones 3 through 9, and here's the counterintuitive fact most gardening content gets backwards: yarrow performs better in poor to average soil. Rich, heavily fertilized ground makes it floppy and far less aromatic, which means less pest-repelling power. Let it struggle slightly and it genuinely does better for it. The next time you're about to pull one out of a flower bed thinking it's an invader, check the leaves first. Number 9 is ninebark, and I want to be straight with you, this one isn't even a flower, it's a shrub, and in a nursery pot it looks like a plain dark bush with no obvious selling point next to plants covered in blooms. That's exactly why it gets ignored. The foliage runs deep burgundy to almost black-purple depending on the variety, and that dark backdrop makes every flower color planted near it look more saturated. Your yellows look brighter, your purples look richer, simply because of what's sitting behind them visually. It's a bigger plant than anything else covered today, reaching 5 to 8 feet depending on the cultivar, so give it real room, 4 to 5 feet of space at minimum. It handles full sun to part shade, isn't picky about soil pH, and is hardy in zones 2 through 7, meaning it survives winters that would take out half the plants on this list. If you're only ever shopping for flowers at the nursery and skipping foliage plants like this one, you're leaving half of what makes a garden actually look designed instead of just planted. That's all 9. Every single one of them looked unremarkable, sometimes genuinely unattractive, sitting in that plastic pot, and every single one of them outperforms the flashy, photogenic plants sitting right next to them once they're actually established in your yard. The plants that look the most impressive at the nursery are often bred specifically to bloom hard for a few weeks under fluorescent lighting to catch your eye and get bought, not to perform for you across an entire season. If any of these change what you reach for on your next nursery trip, or you already have one of these plants and never realized how underrated it actually was, tell me which one in the comments. And if this saved you from walking past something worth planting, that's exactly why subscribing matters. The next video breaks down the exact opposite of this list, the popular plants everyone buys that quietly underperform once they're actually in the ground.